Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve. Today's video is a review of the new Hulu series, The Girl from Plainville, starring Elle Fanning. Partially a review, partially a discussion. If you're not already familiar with the premise of the show, I will give a bit of background information about the case that is being adapted for this story. In 2014, a young man named Conrad Roy, who was 18 at the time, took his own life, and after this, his girlfriend, Michelle Carter, who was 17 at the time, was found to have sent him text messages encouraging this ideation he had, and also when he was in the process of attempting to poison himself with carbon monoxide, he had gotten out of his truck and called her, scared, and she apparently had told him to go back into the truck. Michelle ended up being put on trial for involuntary manslaughter, and the case ended up receiving a considerable amount of media attention. I remember hearing about this story in the news when it was being predominantly highlighted, and I remember how sensationalized the coverage was, particularly in regards to people making judgments about her appearance, about what they perceived to be her demeanor, which they were presuming to know based on, in particular, one unflattering candid photo of her, and of course, what she had apparently done to be put on trial in the first place. I have now watched the entire series. There are 8 episodes in total, and I watched it in its entirety first. After that, I went and watched the documentary about the case and the trial, which is on HBO Max. The documentary is called I Love You, Now Die. When I first started watching the Hulu series, part of me did wonder if they were going to be presenting the story as something overly sympathetic to someone who did not necessarily deserve that sympathy, or perhaps they would end up over-dramatizing things for the sake of entertainment value. But when I watched the documentary after having seen the Hulu series, I ended up feeling like a lot of what was presented in the Hulu series matched the information and details and context that was presented in the documentary. This is by no means my way of claiming that Michelle was in any way justified in what she was doing, but my impression of the case and the details of that case are that the media heavily ostracized her in a way that did not accurately present the complexities and many facets of both of the key people of this case, those being Conrad and Michelle. I found that the Hulu series was effective in using the many episodes to flesh out that both of these teenagers struggled a considerable amount with their mental health, and the closeness that they had proved detrimental because neither one of them was in a position to be helping the other person to effectively work on their mental health struggles. When I first watched the series, there were certain parts that I couldn't help but feel shocked by, and I couldn't tell whether or not it was playing into that aforementioned tendency of over-dramatization that often occurs in series like these for the sake of entertainment, only to find out later on that the documentary verified that those aspects that I found so shocking were accurate to what had actually gone on between these two, or the things that happened in their respective lives, or even what happened after Conrad's death. As a general disclaimer, in addition to the show addressing matters related to mental health struggles as they apply to trying to take one's own life, the show also presents how Michelle struggled with her body image to such an extent that she suffered from an eating disorder. So if any of you are sensitive to either of those topics and would be better off avoiding dramatic fiction that has that in the story, then of course I would advise you to set and follow the boundaries that will keep you as healthy and safe as possible. I've made an effort at this point to keep my feedback about the Hulu series fairly vague, so you have the option of not being overly spoiled right away, but now I would like to get into discussing more of the specifics about the story as it applies to the Hulu series and the real events that were outlined in the documentary. I don't know how simple it is to draw a line between spoilers and not spoilers, considering that all of this is based on real events and presents a lot of information that is already out and available to the public, particularly in the HBO documentary. But I know that I personally tend to be very picky about subjecting myself to premature spoilers, so here is your disclaimer that I will now be getting into more of those details. All things considered, The Girl from Plainville does a good job of fleshing out a lot of facets of both Michelle and Conrad's life circumstances, their respective struggles with mental health, and different details that are important to know in order to understand how it was that this enormous tragedy happened. Even though they have to cover a fair bit of what happened after Conrad's death, they have a really good flow for the story where you're not only following what Michelle did after Conrad died, you are also learning about Michelle and Conrad's relationship with each other, with the other people in their lives, and their mental health struggles. It's a lot of information to cover, and this story definitely could not have been told as effectively in a feature film. It's much better served in the television medium. The performances are especially memorable during the intense dramatic scenes, one example being when Michelle is mimicking Lea Michele from Glee. It's very uncomfortable to watch, and actually there were a lot of parts where I felt uncomfortable watching this series. A lot of that discomfort comes from Michelle's struggles to read social cues all that well. She's very needy emotionally, and because she wants that connection and validation from others, in particular her peers at school, she tries very hard to form those connections and very quickly ends up sabotaging them. It's this vicious cycle that she lacks the maturity or understanding to be able to get out of. The impression I had of the show was that it was good at making that distinction between context and justification. Those two things are not in any way interchangeable. Understanding these other facets of who these two characters are and what they were dealing with in their lives is essential, because if you think about what happened in this case and don't look at it as an extreme, extraordinary occurrence, and you relate it to a larger systemic problem, then you can use this story as a window into what this problem is and what needs to be improved upon to try to prevent anything like this from happening again. There's the lack of knowledge about mental illnesses, whether it's symptoms or how to effectively treat them, and also a lack of access to those resources. All of these things are massive problems that we face in a multitude of countries today. In a larger sense, there is also a need to destigmatize mental illnesses so people can reach out to get help. You see in this show how much Michelle and Conrad conceal their struggles, or try to anyway, from their parents, except when it becomes too severe to successfully hide those problems. This prompts each of them to fixate and rely on each other to open up about their feelings and mental health struggles when, like I said, neither one of these teenagers is equipped to deal with helping another teenager through those very serious issues. One thing the show failed to explain in detail that I was able to get more of a context about from watching the documentary, specifically related to the medical expert. I believe he was a psychiatrist. They show him a little bit in the Hulu series, but you hear a lot more from him in the documentary. He had offered his expertise to testify in the trial on behalf of Michelle, and he was explaining about things on a scientific biochemical level. Those were details that appear to have been omitted from the dramatic narrative of the Hulu series, perhaps because it didn't flow well in the narrative, but I do think that it's important to also hear that information when forming your judgment about the case and what happened in it. One of the things this expert mentioned was that antidepressants can cause nightmares, and that was seemingly relevant to some of the conversations these two were having with each other and what fed into this ideation of suicide. There were mentions of how they had seen the devil, and this expert was saying that that could have been attributed to a side effect of the medication they were on. Another thing he said, specifically about Michelle, was that she was at one point taking Prozac, and then she switched to Celexa. He further stated that it caused an involuntary intoxication, and as a result, she had her neurochemistry disrupted. This perspective feels like it would be important to have. I'm not an expert on which medications can cause which side effects, but I would imagine that some of these medications are presumably powerful enough to significantly impact a person's emotions and behavior, and this is especially complicated when you are dealing with teenagers taking stronger prescription medications. This expert was saying that Michelle would have been acting in what he referred to as a hypomanic state, and really the level of detail he goes into when explaining his professional opinion on the situation and cross-referencing that opinion with things that were in her text messages. It's just a very large amount of information that presumably could not be easily inserted into the Hulu series because there probably wasn't room to fit all of that information in without derailing the pacing of the story as it applies to a fictional scripted series. I think that this story became really prevalent in the media when the trial was going on, at least partially because the media played into this narrative of making her out to be someone who maliciously set out to harm another person. But what I like about the Hulu series is that it expands the scope of the audience's view of what went on beyond that oversimplified narrative of the trial and what was being put on trial. It forces you to look a little deeper into the complexities of the case. This story can provoke a lot of debate about the ethics of the situation as well as the legality. I personally am of the belief that the legal system has not caught up to advances in technology in all the ways that it needs to. These devices that we're so accustomed to using now develop and evolve faster than new laws are able to be created to accommodate those changes. And speaking of the legal system, one of the things that is briefly touched upon in the show that I want to bring more attention to is the racial disparity as it pertains to the prison industrial complex. Yeah, you knew I had to bring it up, right? Both of the people in this case, Michelle and Conrad, were white and came from incredibly affluent backgrounds. They met at some sort of resort or a country club. I don't know what it was, but it was certainly not the type of environment I am familiar with. I'm firmly of the belief that one of the multiple reasons why this case received so much attention and played out the way that it did was because of their ethnic and economic backgrounds. It's been shown time and time again that the systems of law enforcement and the judicial system are far more favorable towards those who are both wealthy and white. The show makes a point of saying that Michelle had a high-profile lawyer who had experience with it was either high profile or outright celebrity clientele. If Michelle did not come from the background that she did, her parents would not have been able to pay for a lawyer of that caliber. Additionally, despite the fact that she was found guilty by the judge, her sentence was incredibly lenient compared to the horrific sentencings that we see for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and economically poor people whenever those people are put on trial for any number of charges. To be clear here, the prison industrial complex is horrific and it needs to be disbanded. My point in noting that Michelle's sentence was not very long is not to say that her sentence should have been some obscenely long sentence like what we see those other people getting. The show clearly presents how she was both mentally and emotionally unwell, and so was Conrad. They needed help and support before it ever got to the point of someone taking their own life or even making an attempt to do so. Michelle ended up being sentenced to 2.5 years in prison, which was eventually reduced to 15 months in prison plus 5 years probation. 15 months is a long time to be incarcerated. The US government just likes to demonize people and keep them imprisoned in for-profit prisons in order to exploit them for labor that those people are paid little to no wages for. I hope that when people watch this Hulu series, they will have their perspective broadened to think more about the necessity for greater empathy and not only how we treat people around us so that they don't feel alone, but also having more empathy in the legislative and judicial infrastructures that we all have to live under. More mental health resources and education, and a more compassionate judicial system that is not designed to mass incarcerate a predominantly poor, working class, and BIPOC population. All of these things are absolutely fundamental requirements and reforms that need to happen. Those are my thoughts on The Girl from Plainville and a number of other larger socio-political issues related to it. If you would like to watch the series, it will begin premiering on Hulu on March 29th. If you're watching this video right when it goes up, if you wait just a couple of hours, I will be publishing another review today. This time it will be on the Apple TV series We Crashed, starring Jared Leto and Anne Hathaway. Normally I would leave more space between uploads, but I'm publishing both of these reviews according to the embargo date and time that each of them has. As soon as I'm allowed to publish them, they are being published for anyone who wants my commentary about these new television series that I've bothered to share my opinions on. There you have it. You are getting a double upload today. Also stay tuned for new reviews and commentary videos, which will be going up next week on a Netflix series. Again, those will be published according to the given embargo date and time. So I will see you in the next one. Bye.